The story of the world is rarely recorded by the people who actually saw events happen. More often, it is written by those who decide which words will last through history. Throughout time, kings, empires, and powerful institutions have chosen which stories would be copied, translated, and taught, and which ones would be pushed aside, forgotten in remote libraries, or buried under centuries of silence. Because of this, for many generations, the Western world depended on a carefully shaped biblical canon. It was clearly defined and organized to teach core truths, but not always to uncover every hidden mystery. In the book of Genesis, the story is told in a direct and almost harshly simple way. We are shown creation, the fall, the removal from Eden, and then the narrative quickly turns into lists of names and ages. Adam lived 930 years and then died. One short sentence closes nearly 1,000 years of life. There is no description of his final days, no insight into his thoughts at the end, and no record of what the first man felt when he faced death, something that had never existed in the garden. The text continues forward as if silence alone was enough. Yet silence does not always mean that memory has disappeared. Far from the theological foundations that shaped Europe and the Western world, beyond the Red Sea, in the rough highlands of Ethiopia, a different tradition was preserved with remarkable dedication. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church still protects one of the oldest and most complete collections of Christian writings. Within its care are scrolls that were not shortened or filtered in the same way. These texts do more than simply state what happened. They attempt to explain how and why. These writings are not satisfied with saying that Adam died. They describe his final days, his deepest fears, his last prayers, and the unseen legacy he passed on to his children before leaving this world. According to these scrolls, the end of the first man was neither quiet nor ordinary. It was a moment filled with spiritual significance, one that echoed not only among humanity, but throughout the very structure of creation itself. The death of Adam, these records claim, did not pass unnoticed in heaven. Today, we step away from the familiar text and move into deeper ground. We enter records that time itself has surrounded with silence. We walk through traditions kept alive for centuries in caves, monasteries, and stone-carved churches. There, far from shortened versions of the story, we encounter a rich and deeply symbolic account of what truly happened when the first man took his final breath. But to understand Adam's death, we must first grasp the unmatched weight of his life. Before speaking of his last breath, we must travel through the long passages of his memory. For Adam was not only the first human to live, he was also the first human to remember. Imagine not just growing old, but moving through nearly 900 years with full awareness. Not memory that fades or breaks apart with time, but a complete and continuous memory that never disappears. The ancient writings preserved in Ethiopian tradition describe Adam not as a distant ancestor wrapped in legend, but as a man shaped by loss. A man who awoke each day fully aware of what had been taken from him, while his descendants inherited only fragments, stories, symbols, myths, and distant echoes of Eden. Adam carried something no one else ever could. He had been there. He walked paths that no longer exist. He touched trees whose names have vanished. He heard sounds that would never again be heard on the earth. He breathed a peace that no later generation would ever know. These texts state that before the fall, Adam and Eve did not wear clothing made by human hands, nor did they require it. They were covered in something far deeper, living glory. Their bodies did not simply reflect light, they were filled with it. This light did not come from the sun or the stars, which had not yet reached their full role, but flowed directly from the presence of the Creator. It was not something placed upon them from outside, but something alive within them, moving and overflowing from the inside out. There was no shame, no decay, and no concept of death. The human body existed in perfect unity with the spirit, and matter itself followed the order of heaven without resistance. Humanity was both creation and sanctuary at the same time. Then came the break. When they were sent out of Eden, that light did not vanish instantly. Instead, it slowly faded, like a flame losing its air. There was no sudden collapse, but a long and painful draining away. The glory withdrew, leaving only the memory of its warmth. From that moment, the world became heavier. The air felt thicker. The earth lost its kindness. For 39 years, Adam lived within a body that had grown dull and vulnerable to time. He felt gravity pressing on his bones, stiffness settling into his joints, pain that never fully disappeared, and exhaustion that gathered like dust within the soul. Every wrinkle became a quiet reminder of what had been lost. Every sickness stood as visible proof of separation. The scrolls explain that this change was not only physical, but deeply spiritual. Adam's body itself carried the break between heaven and earth. He became the first living witness to the fall, a body that still remembered heaven, yet already belonged to the dust. Life outside Eden is described as constant struggle. The land, once cooperative, began to resist. The soil demanded sweat, endurance, and suffering. Thorns appeared where abundance had once been natural. Animals that once recognized his authority now responded with fear or aggression. The world that had come into being under his voice became unfamiliar even to the one who had named it. Creation itself seemed to remember the fall, even when humanity tried to forget. Ethiopian tradition clearly teaches that Adam's long life was not a blessing of comfort, but a conscious burden. He lived long enough to watch sons, grandsons, and entire generations be born, grow old, and die without ever knowing what he had known. He buried descendants who had never seen the glory he once experienced. He alone fully understood the scale of what had been lost, because he was the only human who had breathed, even briefly, the atmosphere of heaven. According to the ancient manuscripts preserved in Ge'ez, death was never a simple or sudden moment for Adam. It revealed itself as a slow tragedy, unfolding in layers, like echoes moving through centuries of memory and pain. The first death occurred at the moment of disobedience, when the fruit was raised to the mouth. Something unseen broke at the heart of creation. It was not the body that died at that moment, but the spirit. The flame of direct communion with God was put out. Adam continued to breathe, continued to walk through the newly shaped world, continued to speak words, but the life that flowed directly from divine breath had been interrupted. He remained alive in his body, but dead within, a wanderer carrying his own flesh as a constant sign of the break that had occurred. Then came the death of what he loved most. This was not physical death at first, but relational death, the kind that does not immediately harm the body, yet tears relationships apart, teaches the pain of emptiness, and introduces absence into the world. If the first death happened in the spirit, this one happened in love. The ancient scrolls speak of Abel's murder with deep sorrow, describing it as an event for which humanity had no words, no memory, and no example. Never before had a human stopped breathing. Never before had silence felt so heavy. Never before had time seemed to freeze before a lifeless body. Adam and Eve watched as their son lost his warmth. They felt life slowly leave his body. They saw the light fade from his eyes, yet they did not understand what they were witnessing. They stayed beside him for days, calling his name, touching his face, holding his cold hands, waiting for him to wake. They believed he was only in a deep sleep, because the world still had no language for death. There were no rituals, no goodbyes, no structured mourning. There was only the confusion of wounded love standing before something that could not be undone. Only when the birds of the sky began to descend and fight over his body did reality reveal itself in absolute horror. Standing there, before a creation now consuming its own children, Adam finally understood the full weight of the words spoken in the garden. From dust you came, and to dust you shall return. Words that once seemed distant now had a face, a smell, and a terrible silence. The world that had once worked with humanity became a broken reflection of it. Creation, which had been placed into Adam's care, now returned to him the consequences of the fall. Burying Abel was not only an act of sorrow, it was a beginning. It was the first burial in human history, the solemn confirmation that death had crossed the boundary Adam himself had opened and had now reached his children. The earth received the first human body, and with it, the silent evidence of the fall. The soil that once sustained life now learned to hold the dead. From that day forward, Adam understood that death would not be a rare visitor, but a rule established in the world. As Adam approached his 10th century of life, the third death arrived. The death of the body, the unavoidable physical collapse. The manuscripts describe Adam as a living image of creation's decay. His bones groaned under the weight of centuries. His flesh weakened. His eyes carried the memory of a heaven that no longer opened. His soul held the unbearable knowledge that he had been a guardian who failed. Every pain echoed the lost garden. Every breath became a quiet mourning for a creation that slipped from his grasp. When the end drew near, Adam did not behave like an ordinary man. He did not choose a simple grave or a resting place meant to be forgotten. Instead, he called his son Seth and led him to a specific location known as the Cave of Treasures, a cave set on the slope of a sacred mountain near the borders of Eden. According to Ethiopian tradition, this place became humanity's first sanctuary, the first church, the first library, and the first royal treasury, a sacred threshold between the lost heaven and the wounded earth. Adam instructed that after his death, his body should be embalmed with the holy spices of that mountain. Then he revealed something even more profound. When he was driven out of the garden, he had not left empty-handed. He had managed to carry with him 3 particular items: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These were not ordinary objects, and they were not kept for sentimental reasons. They were symbols of Eden, pieces of a perfect world preserved for a time that had not yet arrived. Adam commanded that these treasures be placed in the cave beside his own body. He told Seth that they must be protected at all costs, not as reminders of the past, but as signs meant for the future. According to the scrolls, these objects were more than symbols. They were prophecy given physical form. Adam understood that the world he was leaving behind was moving toward darkness. Future generations would slowly drift away from the presence of God, and the light of Eden would appear to be lost forever. Yet Adam believed he would recognize the moment of restoration. He foretold that many ages later, these same treasures would be taken from his tomb and presented to a king not born in palaces, but in a cave. A king whose arrival would restore to the world the light that had been extinguished in the garden. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh would move through history as silent witnesses, linking the first man to the last Adam. This detail, preserved in the ancient Ethiopian scrolls, forms a powerful connection between the beginning of creation and the birth of Christ. It reveals a deep and rarely explored link that joins fall and redemption within a single divine storyline. What began in the garden does not end with exile. What was broken in Eden is not broken forever. History moves like an unseen thread, guiding the dust of creation toward the wood of redemption. In the final days of his life, Adam gathered his descendants. The scene described in the manuscripts is solemn and almost liturgical, filled with reverence and awe. The first man, whose voice once named all of creation, now spoke with difficulty, yet with complete spiritual clarity. He did not speak simple words of goodbye. Instead, he delivered a warning, a final testimony focused not on land, inheritance, or power, but on the spiritual survival of humanity. Adam called the descendants of Seth to remain faithful and commanded them to stay on the sacred mountain, separate from the descendants of Cain who lived in the valley below. The mountain represented height, watchfulness, and closeness to God. The valley symbolized ease, abundance, and distraction. This separation was not about location, it was about the heart. Adam warned that the descendants of Cain would develop tools, arts, and music capable of captivating the senses and dulling the conscience. He said that pleasant sounds, irresistible rhythms, and beautiful sights would be used as bait, drawing the sons of Seth away from the mountain. Not because these things were evil by nature, but because they would be used to replace the presence of God. His final message was not political or territorial, it was spiritual, a call to remain set apart. Adam understood that the world would become an unseen battlefield, where desires, images, and unseen influences would fight for the human heart. When his warning ended, the scrolls say a supernatural silence settled over the earth. The wind stopped. No birds sang. No sound moved through the air. Creation itself seemed to recognize the moment. Adam closed his eyes, and the first human heart stopped beating. The year was the 930th year of the world. The man who had received breath directly from God returned his body to the dust. One of the most repeated and unsettling questions among scholars of the ancient tribes and guardians of these scrolls is simple. Where is Eve? In the account of Genesis, she appears at creation and at the fall. She is remembered at the birth of her children, and then she vanishes from the biblical record. There is no clear record of her death. No burial, no mourning, only silence. Ethiopian tradition provides an answer that is both beautiful and unsettling. According to these texts, Eve's end was hidden because she does not represent only a historical figure, but an eternal principle. While Adam embodies law, transgression, and the judgment that brought death into the world, Eve represents something that could never be fully erased: the promise of life. She is remembered as the mother of all living beings, not only in a biological sense, but spiritually, within God's divine plan. The scrolls suggest that Eve continued to live after Adam's death, remaining among the descendants of Seth as a silent, almost priestly presence. She became the keeper of Eden's memory, a living bridge between the lost world and the world yet to come. Some manuscripts indicate that, at the end of her days, Eve was laid to rest in the Cave of Treasures beside her husband. Even so, the deliberate silence in Scripture serves a deep theological purpose, shifting attention away from Eve's death and toward what would emerge from her, the promised seed destined one day to crush the serpent's head. But the story of Adam's body does not end in the cave. The Ethiopian scrolls trace his remains through the greatest judgment in human history, the flood. They state that Noah was given direct instruction to bring Adam's coffin into the ark. As the fountains of the deep broke open as the ancient world was undone by the waters, as mountains vanished and cities disappeared from memory, the bones of the first man were preserved safely floating within the vessel, carrying humanity's future. After the flood, Shem, Noah's son, received a final task. Guided by an angel, he carried Adam's body to the center of the earth, to a place identified in the texts as the place of the skull. In the Ge'ez manuscripts, this site is recognized as Mount Golgotha. Tradition holds that Adam was buried exactly where, centuries later, the cross of Christ would be raised. According to these ancient writings, the first man waited in the dust for the moment when the last Adam would stand upon his grave and finally defeat death. This leads to a truly astonishing conclusion. The Ethiopian tradition affirms that when the spear pierced Jesus, side and blood and water poured from his body, the flow was not lost to the ground. It ran through the creatures of the earth, passed through the rock of Golgotha, and touched the skull of Adam, buried there since the beginning. The last Adam was literally washing the first Adam with his own blood. Redemption returned to the very place where the fall had begun. This is one of the most extraordinary details of this tradition. An invisible link connecting Genesis and Calvary, a detail that the Western world largely omitted from history, but which the tribes of Ethiopia have preserved faithfully for nearly 2,000 years, passing it down as a sacred mystery from generation to generation. Why does this matter today? Why should we care about the conflict of Adam and Eve, the cave of treasures, or ancient bones hidden beneath the earth? It matters because these scrolls remind us of something essential. Our history is deeper, older, and far more supernatural than we are usually told. We are not just the product of random biological events. We are heirs to a spiritual heritage that carries the memory of Eden, etched not only in our souls, but in the very bones of humanity. The Ethiopian Bible invites us to see the world through a new perspective. It shows that no death was meaningless, no tragedy forgotten, and no fall went unnoticed by God. Everything has been woven into a master plan that stretches across thousands of years. From the gold hidden in a cave to the blood shed on a wooden cross, the story of Adam is not just one of loss, it is a story of hope. It teaches us that although we lost our garments of light, a path back to the garden has been unfolding from the very beginning. A path marked by promise, sacrifice, and ultimately, redemption. The tribes and guardians of these scrolls, living in the ancient monasteries of Aksum and Lalibela, performed an immeasurable service to the world. They preserved the flame of this story when many tried to extinguish it, safeguarding truths that survived centuries in silence. And now we want to hear from you. Did you know about the Ethiopian Bible before? Share your thoughts in the comments. May God bless your life, and I'll see you soon.